Hey fermenters, Austin Durant here, and welcome to another episode of Fearless Fermenting Fact Fridays, where we answer your most burning fermentation wrong with my kombucha. Now, I was actually hanging out at one of my favorite spots, and a lady came up to me and recognized me and was like, I started making kombucha, and then I kind of got, it was just kind of meh, so I stopped. So I realized that this is probably a pretty common thing. It's easy to get into a rhythm, but it's just as easy to find something that, doesn't go your way. She was comparing it to the store-bought brands and how it just wasn't quite right. So we sat and talked a little bit, and I kind of gave her some tips. And then I thought this would be a really good topic for this week's show. So before we dive in, remember Fermenters Club, that's our YouTube channel, but it's also a website, fermentersclub.com. Go ahead and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. We've got free recipes and probably over 100 recipes, plenty of tips on how to get started if you're just starting on your fermentation journey. We also have online self-paced classes at Fermenters Club Academy. You can actually test drive a few just to see the flow of it. And we also have things like one-on-one coaching with me. I've been fermenting for over 15 years now, as well as we do bespoke team building workshops. I've done them all around the country, and they're a lot of fun. If you really want to engage your team and learn a valuable skill such as fermentation, reach out to us. And of course, please like, subscribe, and share this video if you felt like you got something out of it. I also have a book called Fearless Fermenting. I like to say it's a textbook meets cookbook, and it's all about food fermentation. It took me about 4 years to write. I think it came out very beautifully. And right now, through May 15th, you can get a signed hard copy directly from our website for just $29 shipped throughout the US. So it's a heck of a deal. If you're outside the US or have other formats you like, the book is also available on Amazon. All right. So let's take a look at some of what I've diagnosed as the most common things that can go wrong when making kombucha. So one is that the kombucha never really ferments. You start it, as you know, kombucha starts off as sweet tea basically, and it makes its journey as the organic acids form and becomes kombucha. Well, sometimes that just doesn't ever happen. Another thing that can go wrong more commonly is that it over ferments, meaning it usually takes anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks, depending on where you are, what season it is, etc. But sometimes you just forget about it and it goes way over the top, and it basically becomes vinegar at that point. So there actually is another live I did a few weeks ago on what to do when that happens. What can you do with overripe kombucha? So look for that title. Perhaps the most common thing that goes wrong is during the secondary fermentation. It just doesn't turn out right. It's either not fizzy, or it isn't flavorful, or worse yet, the bottle makes a mess, explodes, gets everywhere, paints your ceiling. So that's about regulating the secondary fermentation activity. And then finally, from time to time, if you don't treat your SCOBY well, the SCOBY again is the engine, it's the live culture that makes kombucha, can get mold, and I'll show you some examples of what that looks like. So let's dive a little deeper. So some of the basic troubleshooting again is if you get a moldy SCOBY, and I'll show you a few examples of what that looks like. But basically what the reasons why that happens is perhaps you didn't add enough starter liquid, and when we say starter liquid, we mean kombucha. So you take some ripe kombucha from a previous batch, and you want to add about a cup of that per gallon of new kombucha that you're brewing. And the reason is because you want the pH to be starting off at the safe level, which is about 4.6. Again, I don't try to get too technical and say you have to have a pH meter and that sort of thing. Just know that if you add a cup of liquid of a mature kombucha to your new batch of tea, then it'll be brought into the safe range. So if you don't have that liquid, or your environment is too warm, or there's something else, a parameter that's out of control, you may not, it may lead to get a mold, basically a moldy SCOBY, because the opportunistic molds can take hold if the liquid is not acidic enough. Now the fix to this, unfortunately, is to throw everything away. You don't want to mess around with moldy kombucha. Now contrast that with other things like fermented vegetables, where it is fairly common to get a layer of scum, yeast, perhaps mold on the top layer. And there's other videos you can check out on our page to see what to do about that. It's not the end of the world. However, with kombucha, the mold tendrils can get into the liquid and can make some funky things that can make you sick. So my advice is to just throw everything away, sanitize your containers, and use a new SCOBY. So anyway, that's the fix, is just throw it away. If your kombucha turns out to be too sour, 99.9% of the time, it's because you let it ferment for too long. So just adjust it back next time. And again, find that other video. I'll set a link to it now to what to do with overripe kombucha. And a less common thing that I've seen is it not turning sour at all. And that's usually because your fermenting conditions are out of the norm. So kombucha wants to ferment anywhere from 72 degrees to about 84, which is room temperature, kind of a warm room temperature. So if it's too cold, if it's too far below that, then the microbes in the SCOBY won't be active enough, and they might just not do anything. And so that would be why your kombucha is not fermenting. Another, I guess even less common reason might be that you just have a SCOBY that is dead. I've never personally had that happen. However, it can on occasion if you either, I don't know, just got a SCOBY from a questionable source, or you just didn't feed it for such a long time. It may still look fine, it may still look viable, but it just isn't. So again, I've never seen that personally happen, but I know that that is one thing that can happen. So let's get into the secondary fermentation troubleshooting. So again, what secondary fermentation means is to take your kombucha from basically from the primary fermentation, which is what turns the tea into kombucha. And it's an optional step to add flavors and also to amp up the carbonation, which is when we buy something from the store, we like it to be fizzy, we like it to be sweet sometimes, good balance. We want it to basically be refreshing like soda. So that is what the secondary fermentation step allows us to do. And that happens because we're putting the kombucha into a sealed bottle, and then we're also adding another source of sugar. Usually for me, it's fruit juices. You can actually add just straight up sugar, but it's a lot more interesting to add something like, in this case, blueberries, or in my other bottle here, strawberry. So it's important to remember when you're adding a new sugar source that you are feeding the yeasts, and that will create pressure, because again, we are fermenting it in a container that we will eventually seal up. So we want to be mindful of that. So I like to say a little goes a long way. Use about a 1:16 ratio. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're doing a quart, which would be 32 ounces of kombucha. You only need 2 ounces of juice, fruit juice, which again has a lot of sugar in it, to really get a good balance, a good flavor. And then oftentimes I'll also mix in with the fruit some sort of herb, whether that be dried or whether that be fresh. Here in the case of my seasonal flavor, I actually added rosemary from my garden. So this is a blueberry or rosemary flavor. And in this bottle, it's ginger root. So strawberry juice and ginger root. Now, it's also important to note the way that you're adding the fruit to the kombucha, right? So if you puree or you're using fruit juice, think about it. That has a lot more surface area for the small, tiny microscopic yeast to basically eat away at the sugars. And that will again create more activity, create more flavor, but also more carbonation. So now contrast that with taking a whole fruit or slices of fruit, the interior part of that fruit, that's inside the fruit, is not exposed to the microbes. And so there's less sugars, there are less surface area for the microbes to get at the sugar. So how that will manifest is it will result in a less sweet, more sort of delicate flavored kombucha. So if you want sort of the extreme, take it to the extreme, like juice, or you use puree, you're going to get the most flavor, you're going to get the most carbonation potentially. Whereas if you want something a little more refined, maybe like a champagne, for example, I love slicing nectarines or peaches and putting those in the bottle. And sometimes I'll puree them as well, but I like doing that. It adds a nice sort of more delicate flavor. So the surface area of the juice that you add is going to create a different outcome. Also, if you want to get carbonation, which again is creates a good mouthfeel for when we're enjoying a sweetened drink like kombucha, try to ferment those on the warmer end of that spectrum that I gave you. So about 76 to 80 Fahrenheit is a good range to help build up that carbonation. Another important consideration is the container that you're using. So the best containers to use for making kombucha are ones where the bottle can seal up tightly. So here's a couple of examples. So this is actually a swing top bottle. It's got the cap that can clamp with a little clamp on it that clamps down. That really creates a lot of pressure, and that's good when we want to create something like kombucha. Another no-brainer option would be something like a recycled kombucha bottle. So this is one of our favorite brands, the original OG brand GTs. And if kombucha, if it came in a bottle and it was kombucha, then it's going to be good for you to reuse and upcycle as a secondary fermentation container. So these are my two favorites. Some of the other ones, and these swing top bottles come in all different sizes. Here's one that's just 16 ounces. You can use beer growlers as well, because beer also requires pressure to make it work. So this one happens to be a stainless steel model. Make sure that if you're going to use metal at all, that it is a high quality grade of stainless steel. This is actually I think from a kombucha brand. So anyway, these are the ones that have tightly sealed lids, and they're going to be your best bet for making kombucha. Other things that you could use are soda bottles that are plastic. Now, I don't love using plastic, but there is a difference between the one advantage of using a plastic bottle is that as it ferments, you can squeeze the bottle and tell as the pressure is building up. You can't really see anything visual. There's nothing visual going on with glass unless you actually open it. Now, the only thing I wouldn't recommend using to try to get that fizziness and with kombucha is a mason jar. Now, mason jars are great for all sorts of other things like canning, fermenting, etc. However, they're not designed to hold in pressure. They're designed to more sort of suck in pressure if you're doing canning. So if you're using it, it'll still work. You'll get the flavor, but you just won't get that oomph, that fizz. So these are my recommendations for what to use for your secondary fermentation. Now, let's see here. Some words of caution. If you are new to kombucha fermentation, or even if you're a seasoned expert, but you're trying a new flavor, a new recipe, you want to be mindful and know that these bottles can, again, be deceiving. This can look nice and innocent, but this could potentially be a bottle bomb. Now, that's not a laughing matter. It's a funny term, but at the very least, when you pop it, you might get something, the liquid might explode everywhere if pressure built up. Or in extreme cases, the glass can actually break and cause a mess and maybe cause injury. But I've really not seen that happen except once or twice. So what the advice would be is to, burp your bottle every couple of days as you're fermenting. Now, the secondary fermentation step usually only takes about 2 to 4 days. So it's a short amount of time. However, you do want to burp And what I mean by that is basically you just want to take your bottle and open it slightly just to relieve any excess pressure that built up. So these have both been in my refrigerator, these two bottles. This one I don't think is super fizzy, but let me go ahead and just show you what I mean by burping it. Yeah, so this one's pretty mellow. There's actually no additional carbonation that's come up here. So just do that exercise, once a day, and that's during your active fermentation. And of course, when you're finished fermenting, you would move this bottle to the refrigerator, and that would wind up having the effect of chilling things down a little bit and mellowing things out when we're talking about the excess fizz. So, so again, burp that daily. And here's the other bottle of that. I haven't actually burped this one, but I kind of purposely left it to get a little bit fizzy, just to show you whether something can be overly fizzy. So I'm going to go ahead and open this. Now I can see here, this is a GT's bottle, and I can see the plastic lid looks a little bit, maybe a little bit bowed out. So that could be a sign that there's a lot of pressure here. So I'm going to use them to take a bowl, and this could be pretty anticlimactic, or it could be a fun light show here. So I'm using a bowl just in case it just starts to fizz out of control and I want to capture the liquid without making a mess. So I'm just going to open it. Yep, there we go. So you can kind of see this built up a lot of pressure. So what you can do is you can just very slowly let it do its thing. You can kind of see it's pretty consistent pressure here. So I could either just sort of let it fully come out, and actually this smells delicious. I can't wait to try it. Actually, this is pretty good. So that first burst, again, I caught a little bit of extra liquid, but as you can see, it's nice and fizzy. My mouth is watering just looking at it. So at this point, you can just sort of let it mellow out, or I don't even like to wait. I just go ahead and take it, pour it into a glass here. And this is the zen of kombucha fermentation. So you can kind of see the bubbles that are here. They're mixed bubbles, so they're different sizes, which is something that you would only get through this kind of natural carbonation. A lot of times you will see, or the brands that you get that are from the store are what they call force carbonated, whereas so they take the kombucha and they add carbonation to it like you would at a soda fountain. But this is a much more refined flavor. It's a much more refined texture, and it's worth the wait. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a sip. Wow, that's really lovely. So again, in this case, I'd used whole blueberries that had been frozen. And so when you freeze a fruit and then you thaw it out, some of the juice does come out. So that's why it does have some color, even though these are technically whole fruits. Oh, that's just lovely. So again, the idea is keep your bottle sealed, burp it every day, and then be mindful when you're opening it up. Another little quick tip is that ginger, if you are using that, is known to help with carbonation. So let's say you don't necessarily want to add something overly sweet, get a lot of fruit juice. If you add ginger root, which isn't very sugary, but there's something in it that seems to help with carbonation, that is a tip that you can employ. And the other one more tip is if your kombucha just isn't getting fizzy, in the secondary fermentation, then you can use what's called a seedling mat. These are used in gardening. It's just a rubber mat that has a little bit of an electric element to it that raises the temperature by about 10 degrees. So if your room temperature is just a little too cold, buy a seedling mat, set the kombucha bottles on top of that, and it should bring your temperature into the right range so that you get good results. So something I use in the wintertime, because it does tend to be probably in the upper 60s during the wintertime in our house. So that's about it. Hopefully these tips are helpful in your kombucha journey. Oh yeah, I promised I'd show you some moldy SCOBY examples. So mold So a SCOBY of kombucha looks a little funky anyway. You know, it's sort of like tan colored. It might be dark brown depending on if you're using black tea. So the colors that you want to see in a kombucha SCOBY are tans and whites and browns. And you might see some dregs or strings of yeast. Those are all normal. Now, what isn't normal is when you start to see textures that go on top of the SCOBY surface that look dry or fuzzy or may have different colors. So here's an example of a SCOBY that got mold on it. You can definitely see a splotch of brown or it looks like green and some white fuzz. So I would say this is a moldy SCOBY, and again, the fix is just to toss everything out. Here's another example where it's pretty obvious. You can kind of see the SCOBY was forming down here in the lower left-hand part, and in the upper right, it just got some funky yellows and greens. That's obviously mold. Just throw the whole thing out. This one's a little more subtle. This was a SCOBY that I kind of just didn't feed for a very long time, and it's just starting to develop some white splotches on it. This could be mistaken for a new layer of SCOBY, but I could just tell the way that it was forming. You can see the splotches are really only on one side of the SCOBY. So again, rather than take a chance, I just decided to pitch this whole thing. So that's my troubleshooting tips for what went wrong with my kombucha. Let me know if you've got any questions or experiences with your kombucha. I definitely, when I tell people what I do, inevitably, once in a while, somebody has a story about how they accidentally painted their ceiling with kombucha, which again is something that can happen, as I showed you here. If you're not careful and you don't mindfully open your bottle, it can explode on you. But hopefully that won't happen to you. And that's pretty much it. Remember, check out all of our free resources at fermentersclub.com. And remember, a book's on sale for another week or so. So get a copy of that. And thank you very much. Subscribe to our newsletter, like, subscribe, and share, and leave a comment below if you have one. And I will see you next time on Fearless Fermenting FAQ. Thanks for watching.